All right. Hey, everyone. We are here, Namrita and Tina, with a nutrition cast on ultra endurance sport, I guess, and handling the fueling challenges of it. So I have brought Tina in because she is no stranger to this type of training and racing. She's got some pretty impressive results under her belt with specifically the Unbound XL, which is 350 miles, and the Gravel Worlds Long Voyage, where she actually won this past year. And that was 300. So there are, like, as we're training specifically for these events, obviously the demands are a lot of endurance time, a lot of tempo time, but you also have to consider the fueling piece because you can't just fake your way through an ultra race without having your nutrition and your hydration completely dialed. So we're going to talk about that today. I have two slides, and then I'm really just going to ask Tina some questions and have her walk us through some of her learnings and experiences. But some of the common symptoms that I would say are nutrition related that people experience during long stuff, and let's just define ultra for today as like anything longer than 8 hours. But nausea, belching, flatulence, and bloating are like four of the most common symptoms that can arise at really any point in the event. And some of the reasons for why or these symptoms can arise would be when we are exercising, especially for a long time or in warmer conditions, let's say, warm or humid, we have less blood flow to our GI tract. So we might be able to handle, let's say, 60 to 90 grams of carbs an hour during a 2-hour ride just fine, even with intensity. But maybe in an 8-hour event or a 12-hour event, we, start to experience some issues with that same tried and true nutrition plan. But a lot of the reason for that is your blood is being diverted to your muscles for cooling, to help your muscles, make power and things like that. So you just have less blood flow to the gut to help absorb everything. Heat stress and dehydration will exacerbate that even more. Stress and anxiety, which is common. You have all sorts of challenges thrown at you in an ultra race. So, even if your pre-race nerves are calmed at the beginning, you may have things that cause stress and induce anxiety during the event. And then just not knowing what to eat and drink maybe and the timing. So poor nutrition choices. So eating too much fat, eating too many really concentrated or hypertonic things at a time, eating too much fiber, or just eating too much volume can cause some of those issues. And then finally, some of the nutrition related challenges that we are going to talk about today and possible solutions. Hydration is one. And again, whatever you're practicing during your indoor training or even your early season training might not apply to what you're actually going to be doing out on the course when it comes to race day. So we'll talk about some of the hydration related challenges, how you're taking in energy and how you're fueling. Are you able to meet your requirements? If so, are you able to tolerate that at hours 8, 10, 12, 20, 24? Recovering from efforts, let's say you have to put in, a harder effort than planned. Are you able to recover from that? Can you carry all your food? Can you find food on the course? Accessibility is also an issue. The environment, how hot or cold is it? Are you at elevation? How long are you going to be out there? And finally, being prepared for changing conditions, because all of those things will influence what you are able to choose to take in, how much, how often, etc. Tina, what are some of the things now? I'll just leave the slide up as we talk. And so maybe you can talk to some of these points. What are some of the biggest challenges that you found going back to, let's say, your first ultra, which I think was Unbound, right?
Yeah, although if you want to go back even one more, I did some longer, like 200-mile races and some Everestings that were sort of up and above that. And to your point around the tolerance piece, one thing I worked on, and full disclosure, was lucky enough to be working with Namrita as my coach for both of those Unbound and Long Voyage. So we worked on this a lot. But one of the mistakes I made was back earlier was knowing that I needed to get higher amounts of carbs in per hour, but not properly practicing that. And so my first Everesting took me about 18 hours, and I had incredible stomach issues because I was trying to take in way more food and fuel than I had ever before. And so figuring out that balance of how much can I take in, and then practicing with the practicing taking in the right amount of carbs and calories and hydration, and then also making sure that as I got closer to race day, they were the actual same sorts of foods I might be consuming on the course was really big for me. So being able to kind of figure out the hydration and fueling pieces were huge, especially in the heat.
Yeah. Yeah. So what are like, as you figured that stuff out, what was your approach in training? Like, would you go out on hot days and specifically train in the heat? And then how would you adjust your intake during that?
Yeah. Yeah. So I hate the heat. I don't love racing in the heat. I know some people love it. So I previously been doing a lot of take advantage of cool mornings and cool evenings. And as I got closer to this as a component of the fueling piece, definitely going out and testing how does food stay. I know I tend to get kind of queasy in the heat, especially doing hard efforts. And so getting used to figuring out what would sit well in my stomach. How much could I take in hydration? So especially for a really hot race, sometimes it's easier for me to fuel with liquid nutrition, and thinking about something like, a high carb mix in my bottle, that is way easier, especially for something like a gravel race where it's hot and it's fast and everything's bumping around and you're in a pack, and just being able to grab high carb out of a bottle in the heat was helpful. So I definitely was practicing that. And then also just thinking about the gut training piece. And I think it's so cool that you can train your gut to take in more calories, more carbs, more food. And so working and sort of stepping that up and doing it in the heat, since both those, both Unbound and Gravel Worlds in 2023 actually started over 100 degrees. It was very warm, especially for me, who does not like that. It's warm and humid. And so being able to know that like I can kind of get through this, and I know what I'm going to use to be able to make sure that my body isn't unhappy, 2 hours in.
Yeah. Well, yeah, I mean, you're also training in Colorado, so it's not super warm during, even your build phase for training. So it's hard. I know we did some heat acclimation or protocols, et cetera. But in terms of the hydration piece, I know that was one thing that we really worked on with you, because your normal intake was like 12 to 14 ounces of fluid an hour. So how did we determine that? We had you way before and after several of your rides, right? And then you did a really good job of diligently tracking how much you took and then how much of it you actually drank, right?
Yeah, I really I got nerdy. And I started pulling out. For me, it's easy to write things down. So it was either Notes and Training Peaks, or I had a little spreadsheet where I just started tracking things like, how much am I taking in? If I take 2 big bottles, I actually drink both of them. If I didn't, why didn't I? I'm not a super heavy sweater. I tend not to take in a ton of liquid when I ride, but that really wasn't the answer for racing. I needed to up that. And so I also didn't go from taking 12 to 14 to suddenly taking in like twice that in an hour either. So it was a slow build.
Yeah. I mean, I think we kind of settled at like 16 as your baseline. And then obviously, as it was hotter, you would get a little bit more thirsty and naturally take in a little bit more. So I think that's one thing, start where you are and then try to progress. But we start with the hydration piece because it does influence your ability to take in the carbs. So if you're, trying to get used to where you can average 60 grams of carbs an hour for a 24-hour event, you need to start with the hydration piece, because your body is just not going to be able to absorb 60 or more if you're getting progressively more dehydrated through the event. Again, with that lower blood flow to your gut, it's just, you're not going to be able to literally stomach it and then absorb it and deliver it. So going back to a lot of the issues people have, like nausea and bloating and stuff like that, before you even think about gut training with the carbs, you have to start with the hydration. What about the sodium piece? So this is something that's like really confusing for people. How did you navigate that, and how much sodium you take in?
Yeah, I'm not a super salty sweater. I've never had a test, but it's, in terms of even
Yeah.
just looking for markers like salt on my kit and things like that. Like I'm not, as far as I've always been able to, I'm not a super salty sweater. That being said, for the heat for me, especially in both Kansas and Nebraska, it's really humid. And so I did add a little more sodium. And I trained with it too and got used to it ahead of time. I think that's the resounding refrain here is like being able to practice with it ahead of time. But I did end up for Unbound, I had a little bit of extra sodium for Gravel Worlds because it was so incredibly hot. I actually did I instead of taking just plain water, did add a little bit of electrolytes into the plain water, and then my fueling, all my bottles. One thing I did do was have extra sodium in there too. Nothing wild, but that definitely helped, and I think it probably helped me continue drinking too.
Yeah, that's so again, before people end up going to the hydration and the fluid piece, they always go to like, okay, I need to be taking in a lot of sodium. But first you need to hit the fluid, and then you need the sodium on top of that because it helps you retain the fluid that you're drinking. And especially if you're one of those people who is drinking a lot for a long period of time, you're losing that sodium in your sweat. And even this is a little more detail than I wanted to go into, but you like training in Colorado and not necessarily being as heat acclimated when you get to the hot race, you're going to be losing even more salt in your sweat or sodium in your sweat. So that was something like preloading with the sodium, making sure that you're supplementing some salt during your race, either through your products or your drinks, or we'll talk about this in a minute, but like the store stops and convenience stores and things like that, choosing saltier foods that help you retain that fluid.
Yeah.
So how did you do that with race simulation? That's always a good idea, to include a few race sim sessions. How did you practice for carrying your stuff, like what you could carry, and then also when you had to rely on gas stations and convenience food stops?
Yeah, so I did a few races. I certainly didn't. I had done 200 miles previously. So before I did Unbound, I did happen to do an overnight 200-mile ride as part of a training camp, and that was great. Before Gravel Worlds, I did not do anything that long. I knew it was sort of there, but I did do some very long back-to-back days, and did try to practice the nutrition piece of it. And I will say, I gotten food from gas stations before, but before Unbound, I actually walked into a gas station, and I was that strange person that like walked up and down the aisles, and literally I picked up gas station items and looked at the carb count, the calorie count. I looked at the caffeine in drinks because I wanted to be able to know that hour 18 or whatever, or at like 4 in the morning, I could get to the gas station. And I think one of the things that people struggle with is you get off the bike and you walk into the gas station and it's overwhelming. It feels overwhelming. And for me, I knew exactly what I wanted. I was like, okay, I want the iced tea that has some caffeine. I want the fruit snacks that have lots of carbs, whatever. And I made the mistake, and Unbound. I tipped a little hard on sort of just looking at that. And I didn't, what I really wanted was Oreos at the first gas station. I didn't get them, and I regretted it for the next 4 or 5 hours to the next gas station because it's all my stomach wanted. So listening to your body too is also like, what does your body want? Does it want salty food or warm food or sweets or caffeine or liquid, but knowing
Mhm.
to walk into a gas station, think like, okay, here are my sort of 5 best favorite choices. What am I going to grab? And so in my races, I practiced doing that. And that was incredibly helpful. And then also just figuring out, what do I want to bring? So I'm not going to carry all my food for a 300-mile ride, or 350 or anything longer. And so for me, I really sat down and thought about what are things that I can't get very easily at a gas station that I know sit really well. Is that drink mix? Are there certain gels that I really sit well for me? And for me, there's a handful of gels that I just, or choose that just, I know they sit well, they feel good, they make me happy. And so I wanted to have some of that stuff. And so I also think about race strategy in terms of being able to go out and, get through that sort of, at the first gas station, everyone's crowded, everyone's kind of gotten there at the same time. And if I can skip that, or if I can just grab liquid there and keep going, that's good too. So all of those pieces when I was doing the race sim came into play and sort of practicing like what are the things that I can't get elsewhere and you know what is most important for me to carry.
Yeah, that was like very helpful. A lot of good advice in there. So people will probably need to re-listen to that. You did say something though, I just want to make the further point on having multiple options. So, you know, if you are a goo user or you know, whatever your brand is, make sure you at least have multiple flavors that you've tried. Sometimes people will save their favorite flavor for race day and not overuse it in training. So you get excited. I know, like excited to eat a gel flavor. That's the kind of world we're living in here. But yeah, so you kind of keep things fresh and avoid that flavor fatigue so you can still have your, you know, count on that regular fuel intake and then sort of like supplement with what you have at the store stops. And what you did with strategizing even time and like not having to compete with all the other racers when everyone's still together at that first stop is so smart. Um, you know, being able to just drop in, get fluids, rely on your nutrition and then keep going and then have your go-tos. Yeah, when you're tired, like decision fatigue is a major issue in these sorts of events. So doing everything you can to avoid that, having your list, having your like go-to items, but then if something sparks your interest, like just go for it. Otherwise, you're going to be thinking about it for the next 4 to 8 hours, like you said. I forgot about that.
Yeah. I haven't
Um,
made that mistake again at Gravel Worlds. I walked in, I was like, I want Oreos. And I was like, great. I grabbed the like 8 pack of Oreos and I was super happy I ate them. It was delightful. So
yeah.
it
So
happens.
something I've had, you know, other people have issues with this or have had issues with this in the past that I've worked with, like they really want pizza and they end up like at 2 in the morning eating a whole pizza and then regretting it later. So there is, you know, some level of okay, have the pizza and maybe like eat 2 to 4 pieces of it and then wrap up the rest of it and take it with you and eat it slowly because otherwise it's that whole like gut bomb that's going to cause you to almost even slow down for even more for a little while your body tries to deal with that. Um, so there's, yeah, it takes practice, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Um, so let's see. I do want to end before we end. I want you to give like some of your other like maybe top tips or favorite foods and stuff because that was something someone from the community asked, you know, what are your favorite things to get at convenience stores and gas stations? But um cooling strategies, that's another thing. So we did some, you know, hot tub, hot water immersion stuff to get you more heat acclimated. We also, for race day when it was hot, talked about some cooling strategies. And the reason for that was to just reduce the overall heat stress on your body. Remember, with the heat, you have reduced blood flow to the gut, which impacts how you can handle all of, you know, your nutrition. But if you can keep your body a little bit cooler, you know, that might help. So what are some things that you did to keep your body cool
Yeah.
during the event?
Yeah, I'll say too, and I know we sort of glossed over this a little bit, but some of that was like the lead up work, the heat training leading up, and then also the thinking about sort of food and fluid the week of and then the day of. So both those races, Unbound and Gravel World, start in the late afternoon, and they both start sort of 3 to 5 p.m. ish. And so for me, thinking about how do I stay cool before the race, like how am I not just walking around the expo on my feet, sweating, you know, like how am I just like trying to manage that ahead of time? So sitting around the hotel, cold drinks, you know, staying calm, those kinds of things. And then during the race itself, I actually I I went out. I actually brought a cooler to the start line of Gravel Worlds because it's so unbelievably hot. And I went out with ice in I had a hydration pack on. And so my hydration pack was packed with ice. My bottles both had ice in them. Several folks had ice socks, all of those kinds of things to like keep the body cooler. And then at the first gas station, which was 60 miles in, it was still super warm, even though we were getting into the night. And so thinking about things like slushies. I'm not a big slushy person, but I made sort of a kind of watery, slushy slurry to put in my bottles, which I drank. I refilled things with ice. So just like really trying to focus on staying cool. And I think it worked pretty well for me. I ended up biking next to a handful of folks that ended up just dry heaving off the bike, really struggling. And they were saying they wished they had been able to cool themselves more, because that was just they just couldn't tolerate anything. And so, yeah, using those kinds of strategies, and I think the slushy piece has been a big one, that I know is pretty popular. So.
Yeah, yeah. And I mean, it definitely gets challenging when you're out there for so long and, ice and stuff will only stay cold for so long. So it is very temporary, but I think, you starting in probably what was the hottest part of the race, that definitely helped. It helped you to maximize your pace at that point versus like having to really slow down. Because remember, you're
Yeah.
generating all that metabolic heat too when you're riding. So keeping yourself cool to start was super smart. Even when you're stopping at gas stations, I know we talked about like getting ice out of the cooler and like packing ice into your sports bra and your bib, your shorts and your jersey and your pack and all that stuff, and then icing your drinks. Um, Obviously things get different at night when it gets cold. And you kind of have to do the opposite and, keep everything a little bit warmer and just keep moving. But yeah, I think this just speaks to how flexible you need to be in anticipating the changing conditions, how your body reacts to it, how you might have to plan your hourly calorie intake or your fluid intake and things like that. What about caffeine?
Yeah, and I know we talked about this a lot, and because I was trying to manage my caffeine, I'm a moderate caffeine user. I'm a sort of a mixed tea coffee drinker on the daily. So but I do find caffeine helps me during racing. And so for both those long events, I waited until the night to take my caffeine. And for Unbound, I think it was around 1 in the morning. And I think for Gravel Worlds, it was even later. So wait till you started getting that sort of sleepy feeling as the night comes, you're sort of really into the darkness. It's really early wee hours and the dawn feels really far away. And so you start to just get that really drowsy feeling. And so taking the caffeine then is this like delightful burst of like feeling a little bit better. And so I planned and did start my caffeine in both cases, 6+ hours, 9+ hours into the race. And that was really helpful. And then also maximizing it during the cooler hours, so that I wasn't taking in a ton of caffeine in the heat of the day as well. That was also helpful. And so I sort of took a couple bigger doses at night. And then during the day, I had some caffeine in my bottles that I would sip on, or caffeine in chews that I could take in small doses, but not taking, for me, like 100 milligrams or something all at once, was helpful and left me feeling pretty consistent across the ride.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, totally. So as you can see, there's a lot of different things that you need to think about when you're planning. What was the best way for you to kind of organize this? Was it your spreadsheet, your Training Peaks combination, or what would you suggest?
Yeah, I mean, personally, so I had notes and Training Peaks from my race sims and just rides, and I would track, all my long rides leading up. I was tracking how much caffeine am I taking? When do I feel jittery? When do I feel good? All those things are in Training Peaks, so I could look at that. And then I have a spreadsheet, and I guess this was one of my tips would be like, I made a full plan. I planned out, what nutrition am I going to take? I divided it by the number of hours I thought I was going to take. What do I think I'm going to take from gas stations? Will I have enough fuel? How am I going to, balance that? I made a full sort of plan. And then I also, I go into it thinking that's my plan, and then I will adjust as things come. So I'm not getting also too stuck to that plan. Was really important, because in both cases there were some big surprises in the race that popped up, weather issues and just other things that were kind of unexpected. And so being able to be flexible off that was really important. And having my notes, even though it's not like I was staring at Training Peaks during the race, just having written it down, I was like, oh right, that one training ride I did this and that worked really well, and like this is a similar scenario, I'm going to try that. Or for Unbound a couple years ago, it was pouring, and thinking like, okay, what kinds of things can I open and eat in the rain and the mud when your hands are just like covered and everything's gross and wet, and so things like that, just thinking, how do you be flexible? So for me, I planned it out really, really sort of right down to it in an Excel sheet, and then just let it go, once I got on the
Yeah.
course.
No, I mean, that is the way to do it, because you know, re-emphasizing in your brain as you write it down. You have a plan, but you also are smart enough to be flexible with the plan because rarely does everything go to plan, especially in an ultra race. So I don't know that it ever does, to be honest. But it seems like, I mean, you were absolutely well equipped to handle things as they came at you because you had practiced it and you had really thought about it in training. You weren't just like, oh yeah, it was a good day or that was a bad day. I didn't feel so great, but you actually made the notes and thought about, you know, how you could improve that or how you could implement that in the race. And that to me is the key. Um, you can train all you want for these, but if you're not putting in the time and the effort like you did, it's going to be hard. I mean, you can maybe make it through the event, but it's going to be hard to podium or win a race like you are, without that attention to detail. So
Yeah.
good job
I
to
would
you.
I would just add to that, like the number of folks that I saw scratch or finish many hours behind had nothing to do with their training. There were athletes that certainly are stronger, have higher FTPs, all of that than me in both cases. That it was their nutrition or it was like a bike issue or something like. And some of it's you can't plan for. Some things just happen,
Sure.
like that just happens.
Yeah.
But some of it was like, oh, just things that like, you know, the forethought of being able to think through like, how am I going to manage myself, my gear, my nutrition, all of that really hard ahead of time, is sort of to me equally as important as like, did I do the work on the bike?
Yeah, totally. No, I think that's so smart. I mean, one, I feel like just going through the planning and practicing like you did with, you know, the gut training and the race simulation and all the notes and everything, that should help ease a lot of the anxiety of the unknown in such a long event because you know that you are in control of your body and how you can, you know, deal with the elements and the duration. Yes, stuff always happens, but you know, the more you get into this process and are in tune to your needs and your body and how you respond, I think just the more capable you are of making those real-time decisions in the race too, that will serve you better in the long run. Okay, anything to add? I know, I would love for you to give some of your favorite things that you eat and drink on the bike. I know you mentioned Oreos and iced tea. What are a few other ones? And then we'll say goodbye.
Yeah, I'm not a big Coke person. I know some folks love Coke, but my go-to is honestly, there's sort of a moderately caffeinated iced tea, and that hits the spot for me on hot races because it's actually got a really high number of carbs because it's got sugar and caffeine. So I'm an iced tea or water kind of person on the fluid side. Typically, I do like Oreos. They worked well. Fruit snacks have been a really big one for me at the gas station. Nutri-Grain bars. I can find fig bars. I know a lot of us do fig bars. I'll find fig bars at gas stations and I know they sit well because I train with them in the winter in particular. And so I'll do fig bars sometimes. I've done Pop-Tarts here and there.
You like the sweet stuff. What about,
Yeah,
do you ever get salty stuff?
yeah.
And
You
okay.
know, yeah, both races I did do pizza to our
Yeah.
conversation about pizza before. I'm just a couple slices, but
Yeah.
like a hot, warm, salty piece of pizza at like 3 a.m. was pretty great. I've done chips a little bit, but that has not been my
Hmm.
like favorite piece. But I've done like sort of a salty, there's some bars that have like some salt or nuts in them. I've done
Oh,
that.
yeah.
Where that's worked pretty well. Yeah.
Awesome. Well, that was really helpful. I hope you guys also found that full of good nuggets of information because it really was. If you have any questions, go ahead and post on the blog or in the group, and Tina or I will be happy to answer them. So thanks again. Bye, Tina.
Thanks.